What are the differences between your irons and your driver? Well, there's lots, loads, it's a huge long list. But in this video, I'm going to give you two practical differences that are actually going to help you hit the driver better, hit the irons better. Well, let's go through a backswing difference and then a kind of downswing and impact difference. I've got myself a 6-iron here, so let me take my setup. I like to set up with around about 55% of weight on my lead side. So not a huge amount, and looking at that through the camera, you might not even see that, but I always like to feel like I've got a little bit more pressure on my lead side. Now, when we're looking at irons, if we could get you to strike the ball better, I know that would lower your scores, it would increase your enjoyment, and you'd hit the ball better and more solid. So if we can improve that contact, you know, we're going to get better things happening. I like, with an iron, especially a mid-iron, especially your short irons, to feel very centered over the golf ball. And what that means is that when I'm rotating into my backswing, there's not a lot of lateral shift. So one of the sensations that you could have, and I've used it before in videos, imagine you were stood against a wall and your trail shoulder was against that wall. The only way that you'd be able to rotate would be to take that trail shoulder, I'll use the golf club to demonstrate, and relatively quickly move it off that wall. You wouldn't be able to sort of push through that wall. Now what that does is it means that we don't get much of your mass over onto your trail side. Doesn't mean that you can't shift pressure, because you absolutely can, and we do want that. But it means that when we get to the top of our golf swing, we are nicely centered, and it's very easy, or easier I should say, to get into that lead side early. If you can get your pressure to your lead side early with your irons, you will be a better iron player. So many golfers that I see don't do that. They do have maybe a little bit of a shift, and they leave the weight on this leg for too long. So with an iron, nice centered turn, weight to the lead side early, that's really going to help. And I tend to focus on those things when I'm hitting irons. With the driver, a little different. Now it's important to note here that when we look at the differences, these aren't differences that I would be trying to create. They are a result of other things. So what happens with driver? Well, I'm going to take a setup, and with my irons, I'm going to be swinging at 80, 85%, maybe 90% when I'm, you know, maybe trying to jump on one. With the driver, I'm often going a little bit more than that, 90, 95, sometimes 100 if it's a big wide fairway and I'm on for a good round and I want to get it down on a par 5, but I'm looking to hit the ball a bit further. So I need more energy in the golf club, I need more speed in the golf club. And that speed has to come from the body. So when I stand there with driver, and you will see this with so many of the world's great drivers, Rory McIlroy, probably the best example of that. What do we see with them? Well, what they do is they start the golf swing with a little bit more of a shift this way. Now that shift doesn't happen for the whole backswing. It's not a movement which happens completely, but what it does is it shifts pressure early. It shifts a little bit of mass into that trail side. And if you look at someone like Rory, he will actually, probably around about this point here, start to then move his hips back towards the target. But with the driver, there is very often a little bit of lateral shift early. And like I said a moment ago, I'm not trying to do that. It's just me standing here thinking, right, I'm going to give this one a little bit more. I'm going to put a little bit more energy in. And the way I do that is kind of with the body. And you can see that little movement there. That's not me making a swaying move. That's just me trying to energize the body and try and get some speed into the club head. So many of the things that we want to do with the driver, create speed and power, will have a knock-on effect. It will have a consequence. That consequence is this little shift early. So I would not be as good a driver of the golf ball if I tried to stay centered, and I would not be a great iron player if I tried to get this sort of power move away from the golf ball. Yes, you know, when I'm hitting 6, 5s, 4s, there's a little bit of that, but nowhere near as much as the driver. So, big difference in how we move the club away with the irons and how we move the club away with the driver, and you can see those on the screen, or you have been able to see those as we're going through it. So, what happens when we come to impact? Well, a little bit to do with stance width, a little bit to do with what we're doing with the ground and what we do with our weight and our pressure. When I'm hitting an iron, as we've said a moment ago, we're going to get the weight to the lead side early. Once it's there, I then use that pressure that's under my lead side to push me up, out into my follow through. If you could measure my pressure, it would go slightly left, to my trail side, to my lead side, and then stay on my lead side. So my pressure would go trail foot, lead foot. What happens with the driver? Do we see trail foot, lead foot? No, we see something different. And again, this is not something I'm intentionally doing different, it's a result of something. The pressure shift that you would see with a driver in my swing would be trail foot, as we've explained, lead foot, and then trail foot again, finishing on the lead foot. So it goes trail foot, lead foot, trail foot, lead foot. I'm not trying to do that. It's a result of something. Why is it a result of something? Well, think of the center of mass, which is around about here. Think about my width of stance with the driver. It's wider, which means that this gets more behind my foot. Then we think about there might be a little bit more of a lateral shift, which moves it even further back. And then we get pressure into that lead side. Now, when I push off that lead side, look where my foot is relative to my center of mass. There's an angle. So when I push back off that foot, where does it push me? It pushes me back. So with driver, you will see my head moving slightly back through impact. You'll see that with many great drivers of the golf ball. Again, it's not something they're doing intentionally. It's the result of having a wider stance, the center of mass, the middle of you effectively behind that foot. And as you try and put some speed and you push with more force, it pushes you back. What happens to the club head when you does that? It rises. That's great for a driver. It helps you hit up on it, helps you launch it high, helps you get more distance. So these are all good things that we want with a driver. They're not things that we should be trying to battle against and stop. So, different patterns with different golf clubs. Let's go driver first, and then we'll move to iron. Pretty good, up the middle. And then I absolutely do not want to be searching for those same feelings with my iron. And clearly 6-iron off this tee wouldn't be the club that I'd use, but I'm going to feel more centered and a very different follow through. Downward strike with the irons, upward strike with the driver, a little bit more control with the irons, searching for a little bit more power with the driver. Those are two big differences that will practically help you perform with those clubs better on the golf course.